Welcome to the IDPro Show, your favorite channel for hearing about how to grow your career in digital identity. I'm Heather Flanagan, Executive Director of IDPro and the Principal Editor for the IDPro Body of Knowledge.
I'm Chris Cochran from AK Identity, and this show is where Heather and I find the best and brightest in the world of identity to give you the tips, the tricks of the trade, and different perspectives and stories in identity.
And today, we're here to chat with Mandy Neely. Mandy started her career in tech as a level 1 support technician at a managed service provider, but she quickly became a lead and then a manager until she reached her goal of being an engineer under the rapidly developing SOC that they had going. The skills she developed there saw her land a position on the Okta IAM team, despite never having actually touched the platform before, so be inspired by that. She has very, very, very recently moved over to the security team at Komodo Health as a senior security engineer and is currently studying for her CISSP certification. And as we chat today, we may also end up talking a little bit about Lego, scenery, and comic book heroes. Welcome, Mandy.
Hi, thanks, guys. Excited to be here.
I mean, so you and I have actually gotten to chat offline, and I got to say, your career journey so far has been pretty amazing. Going from a level 1 support technician to a senior security engineer really is impressive. And you're still in the front half of your career. So, for our listeners, what would you say are the key skills you developed along the way that's been most critical to your success so far?
So I have one kind of technical answer for you, and then I have a different answer that is a little deeper, but it's not terribly technical. The technical answer is under learn and feel comfortable with the concepts behind object-oriented programming. I don't have like a language I would recommend in particular, but um, during my second degree, I was in a class at Penn State called Language Logic and Discrete Mathematics. And it really broke down a lot of the concepts behind object oriented programming. And I still think about that course to this day. Um, it really helped develop some foundations in other areas that I never thought I was going to have that connection. Um, it's all well and good to say go learn Python and everything, and Python is a very necessary and wonderful skill. But if you want to keep it at a basic level, just make sure you understand object-oriented programming. Um, Now, for the not terribly technical aspect of it, but I think probably is the theme of my entire career: learn to be a good teammate. Learn to how to participate in your team in a productive and helpful and healthy way. Um, Even teams where there may have been somebody that I didn't always agree with, or we had different approaches to things, I would feel pretty comfortable in saying that those teammates would know that I would still go do something for them because they were my teammate, or I would help them if they called me. And presenting that to your team really helps drive collaboration. And they know that if they fall down, you're going to try and pick them up. They will do it for you too, most of the time. And it leads to really strong relationships. I've met some of the greatest people by just being like, hey, what can I do for you? And I know you are much more technical than me. Let me do something else, or something along those lines. And the next one is learn to be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of goes hand in hand with being a good teammate. Um, I am great at arguing if I believe what I am saying. And there are many people who tell you I am annoying in that fashion. Um, but even those people would say that if they can prove me wrong, they know I will accept it. And I
Mm-hmm.
have former team members who to this day love bringing up when they proved me wrong, and they remember that. And I feel like they respect me a little bit more because I can admit, hey, dude, you were right. And I felt like it got me much further.
There's a confidence to being able to say, hey, I'm wrong, right? I think people try to always be right. They always have to be the smartest person in the room. But when you can say, hey, I'm wrong, and I'm going to change my view based on the data that I have now, that maybe the data that you even presented to me, that just makes you a better person, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. And like everybody knows, I think if they are entering an argument with me, um, if they can prove what I am saying is incorrect or show me how their approach is actually correct, I will immediately be like, "Hey, nope, he's right."
Yep.
But until you can present that, I'm not just going to fall over to it. I want to learn what you are knowing. But what you are knowing, what you know. Um, During my studying for my SSCP,
Mhm.
I lived with a bunch of roommates at the time, and I asked that they were not technical, and I asked, "Hey, can I explain some technical concepts to you? Because if I can't explain it, I don't understand it.
Right.
And if I can't explain it, I can't have any sort of feeling that I am correct in that. So, and then I can more easily be proven wrong. And I want to have all the information possible."
Let's talk about that for a second because I come from a SecOps background. I know you've done a lot of SecOps, you've done a lot in identity. What has been the toughest technical challenge you've ever faced, and how did you go about handling it?
So I know the answer for this one. This was back when I was at the MSP, and I was a SOC engineer at the time. Um, we were a Cisco partner, so we resold Duo.
Hmm.
Um, I was attempting to implement an authentication proxy on a FIPS environment,
Hmm.
and it was pending. They were waiting on this to be completed so they could sign some paperwork, cyber insurance, or something along those lines. So we had kind of a crunch on it. I had to figure out how to enable FIPS on their Sonic wall. Um, did that. I was very comfortable with setting up auth proxies normally. Um, did that, read into how I needed to adjust it for the FIPS environment.
Hmm.
Thought I accomplished everything correctly, but was still hitting errors. Um, I ended up going around quite a few different places in the MSP at the time, going to one senior engineer to another, being like, "Hey, I need help. I need help." And there was one gentleman, Brian McShane, who was considered one of the best technical minds at the company at the time, and who still is. He's great. Hardly ever stumped him. I stumped him with this one. I actually got him to say, "I don't know." So we went around in circles quite a bit. There was a lot of that, "Hey, prove me wrong" sort of thing, because um, many just kind of assumed that my config was incorrect. And it was like, "Hey, let's go through it piece by piece together. Show me where I'm incorrect."
Right.
Um, there was a lot of chasing for that. I did not know a ton about certificate authorities at the time. We had to get a self-signed cert. Um, the issue came in the way our cert chain was saved. So while I did learn a ton, I learned way more about FIPS and SonicWall, and I already knew a lot about Duo at the time. So I learned even more about Duo. Um, it just involved having to drag a lot of teammates in. And it came back to like the best thing I could do in that moment was not necessarily try and be the technical whiz for that, but being a good teammate and being like transferring knowledge between the parties who couldn't meet, discussing what we've already tried, making sure the tickets were always staying updated. That was the best thing that I could do in that moment,
Mm.
and be the one talking to the client for all of the updates. Um, in the end, we got our cert chain all figured out. It was probably a huddle of like 6 senior engineers looking at one screen,
Mm.
and it finally worked, and we all cheered. And so it wasn't a terribly complicated thing, but it was just a lot of, "Let's read into it. Okay, let me go drag somebody else back into the call. Let's go back again." And just needed a lot of persistence.
You know those people who say it's always DNS. At which point I usually say, well, actually, no, sometimes it's BGP, but we're all wrong because you get down into it. It's like, it was the darn certificates. They are crazy making.
Yes, yes, and
Necessary, but crazy making.
very necessary. And I did learn a lot of really interesting things about certificate authorities, which I think this was before I took my SSCP certification, and it did help me remember more of my cryptography domain because that made me pull my hair out a little bit.
It does. It does. And as soon as you start talking about certificates and PKI, you really are hitting a fun overlap between identity and cybersecurity. And because, the overlap between those two is really, really big. I do hope that you personally are prepared for the fact that the identity industry is very sticky. Once you've touched it, you never get out of it. We're not letting you go.
Yay. I like that idea.
Good. But so let's talk about identity for a little bit. So, what are some of the common challenges you've observed when implementing like identity focused solutions? And I know those aren't always technical problems. So, think about like what's your favorite way to come to a solution when you're dealing with the identity space?
I will break my answer up a little bit here. And give you my Okta answer and my old MSP answer. So, in the case of Okta, I have found one of the most common issues we run into is just data has not been maintained in our source of truth, maybe the way that we thought it was, or somebody wasn't maintaining some sort of rule or something, and we have to do more cleanup than if we had just kept some sort of constant going. And so when you're trying to key off of certain attributes to correctly present your identity solution, it can be hard when the data is not clean. And nobody wants to clean the data. Um, my favorite way to kind of approach those sort of situations is see what I can automate away from it. Um, there was a project. I'm trying to keep this one kind of high level details. Let me know if any of it doesn't make sense. There was a project where I had to do investigation on and rotation on like 900 service accounts, and that was quite heavy. And there were a lot that wasn't quite. It was created years ago and maybe just didn't actually get cleaned up properly, or uh, whatever. Maybe the person who originally created it left the company and transferred ownership to a new person who didn't have all of the who's and hows and everything of it. Um, I used a lot of Google Sheets to filter things out and try and find some commonalities across them. And once I did, I had used automation to create tickets for all of these accounts. Um, I started creating labels so we can more easily pare them down in Jira was the ticketing system we were using. We can kind of track a little bit better. The labels would allow us to add more than one, and I could more easily communicate with the account holder some of the details of what we needed. So while that was still a very big project and took a lot of time and a lot of my team members' help, I think seeing what I could organize via automation helped us get back to the starting point of let's maintain our data better.
Hmm.
And it has gotten way better. Um, at the MSP, um, I led all of our Duo rollouts. And the biggest issue I had there was convincing uninformed users to listen to me.
Mm.
And the answer there I have found is always hear out their concerns. Like, yes, it might take a little bit longer and it might be a heated conversation on their end sometimes. Hearing out what they are concerned about and explaining what I am doing to help their security posture almost always resulted in them not only agreeing to whatever I said, but saying, "Hey, will you be like the man on the ground for us here to make sure we are comfortable with every step of this?" Because nobody has taken like the time to explain all of these things to us.
Mhm.
So most of the time, I have found when people are really resistant, they just don't know what's happening. And sometimes you can't show them how the sausage is made or anything. It might be way too over their head, but if you can translate it for them, I have found that they're way more comfortable and way more likely to listen to me. So most of the time, they're just scared and want to hear what's happening.
I hope people hear that you are transitioning from talking about sound engineering practice to like real life human enabled like tradecraft. Like you're just kind of going back and forth between the two. There's a duality to our roles. I think a lot of people get kind of locked into one side or the other, whether you're talking about the business side, you're talking about the human side or technical side, but you're really traversing all three of those effortlessly. The one thing I wanted to ask you about is when it comes to security, right? Security has gotten so broad. I remember when I first came into security, it's very simple, right? You had endpoints, you had servers, you had maybe some stuff in the cloud, but not a lot. But now today, it seems like things have grown out of control. I'm probably sure that you could look at the SSCP and see all the different domains that security is really focused on today. But when you think about security and IAM together, has IAM changed the way you've looked at other security domains?
I don't think so too much, but while I started on service desk and kind of always worked in a lot of access controls, and so it's kind of always made sense in my role. Um, ri like, studying for my SSCP and studying for my CISSP, I think really gave me a lot of language that allows me to converse with people outside of identity easier. Um, if I can keep up with somebody when they're trying to explain a CA to me or just cryptography, I feel like they're a little bit more likely to listen to me when I am talking about identity or if I'm trying to just make a general security point. If I can prove I'm not a one trick pony and that I can kind of keep up with you in other areas, that's been the biggest change I have found from studying for those certs. But I've kind of always fallen into identity in the same way of it's a lock and we got to figure out how to unlock it. That's the point.
Yeah. There's a lot about, being able to explain things. I'm willing to bet a whole dollar, a US dollar even, that your your pre-tech career in journalism has actually helped you a whole lot in how you've gone ahead with your tech career and how you've engaged the technical and human aspects of security. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite little backstory bits for me. Um, when I was first going to college, I knew that I wanted to help people. Um, I knew that I did not have it in me to be like a doctor or a firefighter or anything, not like that. So I wanted to think about how I could best help people otherwise. And journalism was what I came up with. I was always good at writing, um, and I really enjoyed it. I was a editor on my college paper. We competed in a lot of different competitions. I am actually a nationally award-winning author, uh, but that one's a silly thing that doesn't really pertain too much anymore. But it's fun to put on my resume. Um, but I started to get a little bit dejected, um, because I would put a lot of heart into writing these really important pieces. For example, like the college I was at, every year I wrote a very big piece on where the college's money was going, like what departments got what. I had infographics. I went to all the government meetings, and I just really wanted people to be aware of how the school was spending money. And almost every year, nobody read it. Um, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like they're going to read what they want to read, but the state of media kind of got me down, and I felt like I kind of lost that fire. I wasn't really helping people anymore. Um, the school I went to for my second degree, which was Penn State at the time through rural campus, did not have a journalism focused major. It was a communications major and it focused heavily on advertising and that sort of stuff. And I just felt like I was really losing the message on a lot of things. And I thought about how much I enjoyed working on my paper's website, and I thought I should pivot to tech. I did, and I stumbled into the MSP, and I very quickly realized, uh, oh, I can help people here.
Mm,
If I make it to security, this is a whole new frontier that a lot of people don't know about, and it you can ruin lives on the internet.
Truth.
People can steal a lot of things, and I I get very worried about kids not knowing how to properly interact on the internet, and I thought, "This is how I can help people. I can
mm,
help them understand and arm themselves going out into the internet, and it's gonna be on them in the end.
mhm,
The last defense is always the user, but if you arm the user with knowledge, they're a better defense.
Mhm.
They're It's a team sport, and you gotta arm the key player. So that's how I really stumbled into tech. Come all the way down from a journalist and just moved over and wanted to help people.
I want to yes and something you said, right? Making sure that the users have the tools because ultimately, as much as we perhaps would like it differently, they have choices to make and they need to understand those choices. But I do want to put in a plug for the architects and engineers that need to make that choice easier, right? That need to make the security options not something that ultimately requires a degree for the end user to understand, but there has to be a balance between the effort that the techies put into it to make it clear and the education for the users so that they know what they're getting into.
Yes. And in addition to that, I think if you know somebody at your organization that does documentation or translation for help desk or just dissemination of updates to end users, give them a hug because they are probably going through a lot and they're trying really hard to translate what all the cool stuff you're doing for the average Joe. And it is a hard job sometimes.
mhm. It is a hard job. And I love that you called out the helping other people segment of your life and of your career. Because I think a lot of people have different driving factors for them in their career, and helping people is one of the most noble. I have to ask, like, who or what has helped you in your career? Is there anything or anyone that stands out in your mind? And what did you learn from that interaction?
I will start with the dorkiest answer, which is right behind me. um, Part of the reason that I really knew that I wanted to help people is I love comic books. In particular, I love Batgirl.
Hmm.
And while everybody knows the story of Batman and Robin, their parents died, they wanted to get vengeance, defend the city, and it turned into a better thing. Batgirl wanted to just help her community. Her dad is alive and the commissioner of Gotham Police, and she actively defies and goes behind her dad's back. Even though she's a girl, she can do this. And I I have a very soft spot in my heart for Batgirl. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention that.
A girl and a librarian.
And a
Yes,
librarian.
that,
Yes.
since that's my degree, I have to put in a plug for that one.
And her first appearance, she was just dressed up as a female Batman on her way to a Halloween party. So she
Mm,
just took advantage of that identity that she happened to kind of have for the moment and used it to do some good with it. Um, for a real answer, for a real person, um, at the MSP, um, I interviewed this person for a level one position, and we talked to him for 5 minutes and said, "Oh my God, you are way too smart for us. But we can't let you go. You are absolutely way overqualified for a level one position. Um, let's bring you on." Um, that gentleman, he ended up developing our sock for the first time. We didn't have a sock for before that,
Mm.
and his name is Michael Fischler. He works at Roblox now, and he became my manager when I moved over to SOC and the lead engineer.
Wow.
And I always used to joke to him that I'm so glad you use your powers for good because you could be a supervillain. He was so smart, still is incredibly smart. Uh, at one point, he wanted to make a point to the partners of the MSP. So he called them all into a meeting and showed them a slideshow that said how I stole all the passwords,
Mm.
and then proceeded to show them their own passwords in plain text. And it was just the greatest like mic drop
Yeah.
that he's like itty bitty, and he's not itty bitty. He's shorter than me. I'm fairly tall. Sweetest guy. Um, and he's just a whiz behind a computer. But in addition to being unreal smart, he is absolutely the in the trenches with you leader. He would lead all of our backdoors and breaches games
Hmm.
because he was the best DM for it and had all the technical know-how and wanted to test us. Um, he would teach you something if you didn't understand it. He would explain concepts behind it. He was constantly trying to grow his team's foundational skills, make sure everybody could do everybody's job, and just a phenomenal manager in addition to a phenomenal engineer. And he- I came to his team after being manager on the service desk. I didn't have any security cert. I didn't have anything to really say I'm gonna be good in security, except for just he had seen me work as a manager and he took a chance on me, and I I owe him a lot. And kind of in that same vein, another name would be John Letnan, who was my first interview with Okta. Um, and I told him, I've actually never touched this platform before. And he said, that's okay. Be honest
Yeah.
in the rest of your interviews with everybody else about that, but I think you're going to be fine. And John took a chance on me with that. And I can't thank him enough for it.
I love that. I love all those stories, honestly. And I mean, it's a perfect segue. Everything from you talking about that guy and the credentials, and people giving you a leg up, or not even just a leg up, but giving you a chance. You've talked about how stolen or abused credentials are one of the biggest issues in cybersecurity. And let's embody Batgirl for a moment. How would you advise organizations to stop credential theft in its tracks? And what should be their top priority in attaining that?
So teach your citizens. Teach I like I really think the user is the last line of defense and generally the weakest. Cybersecurity is a team game. It's a team sport.
Mhm.
And we should be operating under defense in depth. While you can have all these controls and everything, the last line is always going to be the user. So you might as well stack that as much as you can. A lot
Mhm.
of techies can do a lot to add more defenses in place. But unless you are talking to and educating the users, that's never going to get stronger.
Mhm.
At the MSP, I managed our security awareness training and any sort of like phishing simulations. Um, I found it very helpful, and this did not make me a favorite with a lot of our clients, but it was really necessary. And I had some I always like to get security champions on the client side and be like, "Hey, dude, I know this isn't always going to be fun, but I need you to be the good word over there."
Mhm.
I found it really helpful to configure simulations. So if somebody clicked on a phishing link, they were immediately enrolled in a remedial training. It can be like 5 minutes, very short, but that moment of, hey, should I click on this? And they do, immediately having a feedback of like, oh crap, now I gotta go do that course or something. I found to be really impactful because maybe the message just sank in a little bit more. The next time they get a questionable link, they're trying to avoid my terrible annoying training or something. But in the end, it does come back to you have to educate your users. It's not going to get better unless you teach them.
Love it. Mandy, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to hop on the mics with us. Thank you to everyone watching. Definitely thank you to AK Identity and IDPro. And by the way, for those listening, I don't know if you knew this or not, but IDPro, you can be an individual member, but you could also be a corporate member as well. There's all kinds of benefits and things like that to be a corporate member. So be sure to check that out at IDPro website, and definitely say that Heather and Chris sent you. But with that, we will see everyone next time.